The royal mating ball had drawn every bloodline in Arendor to the obsidian keep. Sable Marin stood at the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a stone pillar, her fingers twisting the fabric of her plain servant's dress as she watched the ceremony unfold. Hundreds of wolves filled the hall, pack leaders draped in ceremonial furs, noble daughters glittering in silver and moonstone, warriors standing sentinel along the walls with expressions carved from duty and discipline. And at the center of it all, standing on the raised platform of black marble where the ancient rites had been performed for 1,000 years, stood Kael Draven, the Alpha King of Arendor. Sable's heart hammered so violently she was certain the wolves nearest to her could hear it. She should not have come. Servants did not attend the mating ball. They prepared the wine and laid the linens and disappeared before the first guests arrived. But Sable had not been able to stay away. Not tonight. Not when everything between her and Kael hung on what happened in the next hour. For 8 months, she had been his secret. It had begun the night she healed his wounds after the border skirmish with the Ashfang rebels. She was nothing. An orphan taken in by the keep's healer, trained in herb lore and bone setting, invisible to the court. But Kael had looked at her that night with those storm-gray eyes, and something had cracked open between them. Something neither of them could name until the first full moon they spent together in the Warden's Grove, when his wolf had surged forward and sunk its teeth into the skin just below her collarbone. A claiming bite, given in secret, binding her to him in a way that no ceremony could undo. "I will end this charade before the ball," he had told her 3 weeks ago, his forehead pressed to hers in the darkness of the apothecary where they always met. "The council wants me to choose a political mate. I will refuse. I will present you to the court as my bonded, and they will have no choice but to accept it." "They will never accept a servant," Sable had whispered. Kael's thumb had traced the raised scar of his bite on her chest. "Then, they will answer to their king." She had believed every word, but the ball had arrived, and Kael had sent no word. No message slipped beneath her door, no signal through the bond that hummed like a second pulse beneath her skin. For 2 days, silence. And silence from a man who had once told her that being apart from her felt like breathing through a crushed lung was not silence at all. It was a warning. Sable's hand drifted to her stomach. Beneath the plain wool of her servant's dress, a new life stirred. Barely 2 months along. So small that even the keep's healer had not noticed. She had planned to tell Kael tonight, after the ball, when he came to her flushed with the triumph of defying his counsel. Now she watched him standing on that black marble platform and felt the first fracture of doubt split through her chest. "Daughters of the founding bloodlines," the voice of the elders called out, his ancient rasp amplified by the acoustics of the vaulted ceiling. "Present yourselves to the Alpha King." 7 women ascended the platform steps. Sable recognized them all. She had pressed their gowns and braided their hair while they laughed about which of them would be chosen and never once looked at the servant girl's face. But it was the last woman who stole the air from Sable's lungs, Revka Solvane. She moved like poured mercury, her gown of liquid silver clinging to a body designed to make other women feel insufficient. Her hair was black as a raven's wing, woven with platinum threads, and her eyes, pale, calculating, predatory, swept the ballroom with the confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. The Solvane family controlled the eastern mountain passes. Their silver mines funded half of Arendor's military, and they had been whispering in the council's ear for years that their daughter belonged on the throne. Sable searched Kael's face for any sign of the man who had kissed her breathless in the apothecary just weeks ago. Any flicker of warmth, any trace of recognition. His expression was glass, smooth, empty, utterly vacant. Something was wrong. Kael Draven, Alpha King of Arendor, Warden of the 5 provinces, blood of the first pack, the elder intoned. "The court has presented its candidates. The realm waits upon your word." The silence that followed was so complete that Sable could hear the candle flames guttering in the iron sconces 3 stories below. Her mark burned beneath her dress, a deep, pulsing heat radiating from the scar where his teeth had claimed her. She willed him to feel the connection, to turn, to look, to find her and declare that his choice had been made months ago in a moonlit grove where fate itself had spoken. Kale stepped forward, and Sable saw it. The wrongness she could not name. His movements were stiff, puppet-like. His shoulders, which she knew carried tension like a bowstring when he was conflicted, were slack, loose, as though the muscles had forgotten how to hold the weight of his own conviction. And his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had blazed with ferocity the last time he looked at her, were dull, flat, like stones at the bottom of a dead river. "I choose," he said, and his voice came out thin and hollow, stripped of every texture she had ever loved, Revka Solvane. The ballroom erupted in a roar of approval. Sable felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The mark on her chest detonated with pain, white-hot, blinding. Her knees buckled and her vision dissolved into a blur of candlelight and screaming nerves. She was falling, sideways, boneless, her body surrendering to a grief that went deeper than bone. A hand caught her. Strong fingers closed around her arm, halting her collapse an instant before she hit the stone floor. She was pulled upright, steadied against a chest so broad it blocked out the light of the chandeliers. Sable looked up into storm-gray eyes. Kale. He had moved without conscious thought, crossing 20 feet of crowded ballroom in the space between heartbeats to catch a falling servant girl. His hand gripped her arm with a ferocity that contradicted the emptiness in his face. His nostrils flared, his jaw clenched. And for one fleeting electric second, something flickered behind the dead glass of his expression. Recognition, anguish, a wolf clawing desperately against the walls of its chemical prison. Then it vanished. His hand released her as though her skin had burned him. The vacant mask slid back into place. He turned and walked back toward the platform where Revka waited with a triumphant smile, and his gait was once again the stiff, mechanical shuffle of a puppet on invisible strings. But Sable had felt it. In that single moment of contact, the bond had screamed through both of them. He had known her. His body had known her even when his mind could not. It did not matter. He had still let go. A sob shattered in her chest, and she clamped her hand over her mouth to keep it from escaping. The wolves nearest to her were howling their approval, oblivious to the woman falling apart in their midst. She ran, through the crowd that parted without seeing her, down the servants' corridor behind the east colonnade, past the kitchens where cooks were preparing the bonding feast, past the laundry rooms where her day had begun that morning, folding sheets for a bed that would now belong to another woman. She reached her small chamber at the bottom of the east tower and pressed her back against the door, sliding to the floor. One hand clutched the burning mark on her chest, the other cradled her belly. His child, growing inside her while he placed another woman's hand against his lips. Sable did not weep quietly. She wept the way storms break, violent, gasping, total. She wept until her ribs ached and her throat was raw, and the floor beneath her was spotted with tears. Then she stood, and she packed. A leather satchel, 2 changes of clothes, the vial of frost mint oil for the nausea that struck her every morning. Her mother's ring, the only thing she had left of a woman she had never known. She paused at the narrow window. Below, bonfires blazed across the keep's courtyards. Music and howls of celebration carried on the wind. Somewhere in that glittering ballroom, Kale was accepting congratulations for a wise political union. And no one knew. Not a single soul in all of Arendor knew that the Alpha King's true bonded mate was packing a bag with shaking hands while his heir grew unseen inside her. Sable pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. "I would have followed you into fire," she whispered, "but I will not stand in your shadow while you choose her." She pulled her cloak around her shoulders, slipped through the servants' passage, and vanished into the freezing night. She did not see Kale stop mid-stride on the platform above, his body going rigid as though struck by lightning. She did not see him wrench free of Revka's grip with a violence that made the nearest nobles stumble backward. And she did not hear the howl that erupted from the obsidian keep moments afterward. A sound so shattered, so laced with primal anguish, that every wolf in the capital stopped mid-celebration and turned toward the platform with hackles raised. By the time Kale Draven fought through the crowd and reached the East Tower, her chamber door was open, her belongings were gone, and the only trace of Sable Marin was the faint scent of frost mint oil lingering in the cold air. He fell to his knees in her empty room and did not rise for a very long time. 4 months later, the coastal village of Brindmere had stopped wondering about the quiet woman who lived above the cliffside. Sable had arrived in the dead of winter, hollow-eyed and heavy with a grief she refused to name. She told the villagers she was a widow, that her husband had been a fisherman lost to a storm. They had no reason to doubt her. Widows washed up in Brynmere every season, driven south by sorrow and the need for somewhere small enough to disappear in. She called herself Neve. The village had given her the abandoned lightkeeper's cottage perched on the chalk cliffs overlooking the shivering sea. In exchange, she tended their ailments. She knew herbs. She knew how to set bones and draw fevers, and ease the coughs that plagued the fishermen's children every winter. The village had not had a healer in 3 years, and they did not ask questions of someone who could stop a baby's croup at midnight. Now spring had broken through. The cliffs were dusted with sea thrift and wild garlic, and Sable's belly had grown round enough that the village women had started leaving bundles of knitted blankets at her door without being asked. She had not told anyone she was carrying twins, though the village midwife had listened to her stomach and gone very still. 2 heartbeats, strong ones, unusually strong. Sable had smiled and changed the subject. At night, alone in the lightkeeper's cottage with the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below, she lay with both hands on her swollen belly and felt the twins move. They were restless. One seemed to press toward her ribs while the other curled low, as though they were already arguing about who would arrive first. "You are safe," she told them in the darkness. "Whatever else happens, I will keep you safe." The mark on her chest had never faded. 4 months. Among wolf kind, a rejected bond was supposed to dissolve within weeks. The claiming scar should have smoothed to nothing, leaving only the ghost of what had been. Every healer text Sable had ever read confirmed it. Instead, hers had deepened. The scar tissue had darkened from pink to a bruised violet, and it pulsed with a heat that woke her at odd hours. Some nights it burned so fiercely she had to press a cold cloth against it to breathe. And then there were the dreams. Every night without fail. Kale's voice calling her name. Not commanding. Desperate. The voice of a man drowning. She would wake gasping, the mark blazing against her chest like a brand. False bond echoes, she told herself. But the dreams never stopped, and the mark never cooled. And sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, she could swear she felt something pressing against the edges of her mind, a presence vast and anguished, searching for her the way a blind man searches for light. She buried those feelings deep and kept healing the village, until the day the merchant ship arrived. Neve, young Pip, the harbor master's son, came skidding up the cliff path with his face flushed crimson. "Neve, you must come here. The merchants from Arendor, they bring news of the king." Sable's blood turned to ice in her veins. She descended to the harbor on legs that felt borrowed. The merchant captain was holding court before a crowd of villagers, his expression carrying the relish of someone with a story worth telling. "The Alpha King has lost his mind," the captain declared. "He has emptied the royal treasury, offering bounties for a woman no one can identify. 20,000 gold drakes for her location." "What woman?" someone in the crowd asked. No one knows her name. The king will not speak it. But his wolves have been dispatched to every province, every border town, and every fishing hamlet from the northern ice to the southern sands. They carry a description and orders to search every dwelling. Those who refuse are persuaded. The captain lowered his voice. There is talk that the king's wolf has begun to separate, that he shifts without warning and cannot always shift back. The council has been meeting behind closed doors. They fear he is going feral. Sable stood at the back of the crowd with her hood drawn low, her heart slamming against the mark on her chest. He was searching for her. After choosing Revka in front of the entire kingdom, after pressing his lips to another woman's hand, Kale Draven was tearing his realm apart looking for the servant girl he had discarded. Why? The question burned through her like venom. Why would a king destroy his own kingdom for a woman he had publicly rejected? Why would his wolf fight to separate from a man who had made his choice, unless the choice had never been his? Sable crushed the thought before it could bloom. Hope was a trap she could not afford. Not now. Not with 2 lives growing inside her that depended on her staying hidden. She turned to climb back up the cliff path, and froze. 3 figures stood on the ridge above the village. They had not been there when she descended. 2 were towering, broad-shouldered, their postures radiating the coiled alertness of trained warriors. The third was smaller, hooded, watching the harbor with an intensity that made Sable's skin crawl. As she stared, the hooded figure turned its head and looked directly at her. The mark on her chest ignited. Sable gasped, pressing her hand to the scar as heat flooded through her body. Not the dull burn she had grown accustomed to. This was searing, electric, as though the bite itself was being renewed. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the salt wind from the east, she heard a sound that made her knees buckle. A howl. Faint. Miles away, but unmistakable. She knew that voice. She had heard it in her dreams every night since her exile began. He was coming. Sable did not make it back to the cottage before the knock came. She had climbed the cliff path as fast as her swollen body would allow, her mind racing through escape plans and discarding each one. The cottage sat on a promontory with the sea on 3 sides and a single path leading inland. There was no back door, no hidden tunnel, no way out except past whoever was already waiting on the ridge. She had barely crossed the threshold when 3 sharp knocks struck the door. Sable's hand found the gutting knife she kept on the mantel. It was meant for preparing poultice roots, not for fighting, but the weight of it steadied her. "Neve?" A woman's voice. Low. Calm. "My name is Dara. I serve the Alpha King. I need you to open this door." "I do not know any king," Sable called back, hating the tremor in her words. "You have the wrong cottage." A pause. Then quieter. "I know about the mark below your collarbone, Sable. I know about the bite he gave you in the Warden's Grove nearly a year ago. And I know about the children you carry." Children. Not child. She had said children. Sable's grip on the knife turned white. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because the king described the mark to every wolf in 5 provinces. Because his wolf has been tracking your scent through the bond for 4 months, narrowing the search mile by mile, night after night. And because I am the one who has been trying to reach you before someone else does." The words landed like stones in still water. Before someone else does. Against every instinct screaming at her to barricade the door and hide, Sable opened it. Dara was not what she expected. Lean and sharp-featured, with close-cropped auburn hair and eyes the color of aged whiskey. A thin scar bisected her left eyebrow. She wore traveling leathers, not armor, and her hands were raised and open. Behind her, the 2 warriors scanned the tree line rather than fixed on Sable. "May I come in?" Dara asked. "What I have to tell you cannot be said in the open." Sable stepped aside, but kept the knife. Dara entered and took in the cottage with a single sweep. The drying herbs, the narrow bed, the knitted blanket stacked beside it. Her gaze moved to Sable's belly, and something shifted in her expression. Not pity, recognition. "You should sit down for this," Dara said. "I will stand." Dara nodded, as though she had expected that answer. "I am the king's fang, his spy master and intelligence arm. I was not at the mating ball. I was in the eastern provinces investigating a shipment of contraband herbs that had been intercepted at the Solvane border." The name hit Sable like a fist. Solvane. Yes. The shipment contained a compound we have identified as night veil, derived from shadowroot and crushed moonsbane petals. Its effect, when ingested, is total suppression of the wolf. Not a sedation, an erasure. The human host becomes a vessel, compliant, suggestible, incapable of accessing their instincts, their bond, or their will. Sable's legs gave out. She sank into the chair behind her, the knife clattering to the floor. "The night of the mating ball," Dara continued, her voice carefully controlled, "someone introduced night veil into the king's wine. We believe it was administered during the private toast with the Elder Council, approximately 1 hour before the ceremony. By the time Kale stepped onto the platform, he was no longer making decisions. He was a puppet being guided by the suggestions planted in his mind during the compound's onset." "That is not possible," Sable heard herself say. "I watched him. He spoke. He moved. He chose. He chose nothing." Dara's voice hardened. The compound wore off 72 hours later. The king woke in his chambers with Revka Sylvain in his bed, wearing a bonding gown, claiming he had consummated their union. Sable's stomach lurched. For a moment she thought she would be sick. "He had not," Dara added quickly. "We confirmed it. The night veil renders the host physically incapable." Revka was performing a scene for the servants who would later testify to the consummation. When Kale realized what had been done to him, what he had been made to say, to do, he threw her from his chambers so violently that 3 guards had to restrain him from shifting and tearing through the east wing. Sable pressed both hands to her face. The room was spinning. Every assumption she had carried since the ball, every bitter certainty that she had been used and discarded, was cracking apart like ice on a spring river. "The first thing he did," Dara said quietly, "was go to your chamber. When he found it empty, when he realized you had heard his false words and believed them, when he understood that you had fled into the night carrying his mark and his scent, and whatever else you might have been carrying." She paused. "I have served Kale Draven for 11 years. I have seen him face armies without flinching. I have never heard a sound like the one he made in your empty room." Tears slid down Sable's cheeks. She did not wipe them away. "Who did this?" she demanded. "Who poisoned him?" "House Solvane. Lord Heron Solvane orchestrated everything. The night veil, the planted suggestion, the staged consummation. The Solvanes have spent 2 decades positioning Revka for the throne, and when Kale began showing signs of having found a true bonded mate, they accelerated their plans." "Signs? What signs?" Dara almost smiled. "A king who suddenly refuses every political match proposed by his council, who disappears for hours at night and returns with grass stains on his knees, who begins smiling for no apparent reason during war briefings. The court noticed, Sable. The Solvanes noticed. And they acted." Sable's hand moved to the mark on her chest. It was pulsing with warmth now, not the agonizing burn of the past months, but something deeper. Something that felt almost like a heartbeat answering her own. "He has been searching for you every day since," Dara said. "His wolf tracks you through the bond. Every week, he narrows the distance. He does not sleep. He barely eats. His control over the shift is deteriorating. Last month, he changed in the middle of a council session and had to be physically restrained by 6 wolves." "You said you were trying to reach me before someone else does," Sable whispered. "What did you mean?" Dara's expression darkened. She reached into her coat and withdrew a folded piece of parchment. The seal was broken, but the embossed crest of a coiled serpent, the Solvane sigil, was unmistakable. My agents intercepted this from a courier 2 weeks ago. Sable unfolded the parchment with fingers that had gone numb. The message was 4 lines long. The healer girl has been traced to the southern coast. A team has been dispatched. Ensure the problem is resolved before the king's wolves arrive. The throne cannot be contested by a dead woman's whelps. Dead woman's whelps. The parchment fell from Sable's hands. Assassins, she breathed. Solvane hunters, Dara corrected grimly. Trained killers who specialize in targets that need to disappear without a trace. We do not know how many. We do not know how close. But they know you are on the southern coast, and they are coming. As if summoned by her words, the mark on Sable's chest flared with sudden violent heat. And from somewhere beyond the cliffs, carried on the evening wind, another howl split the sky. Closer now. Much closer. Dara's head snapped toward the window. He is accelerating. The bond. He can feel your distress. It is pulling him toward you faster than we anticipated. Sable placed both hands on her belly. The twins were moving frantically, pressing against her palms as though trying to reach the sound of their father's voice carried on the wind. How long? Sable asked. Dara met her eyes. Before the king arrives? Hours. Maybe less. And the Solvane hunters? Dara did not answer immediately. She crossed to the window and looked out at the darkening cliff tops where the 2 warriors stood watch. That, she said quietly, is what I am afraid of. The sun was sinking below the horizon, painting the shivering sea in shades of blood and copper. And somewhere between the village and the cliffs, something was moving through the shadows that was neither wolf nor friend. The attack came from the sea. Sable had expected them from inland, from the cliff path, the ridge, the tree line where Dara's warriors kept watch. She had not considered that Solvane hunters, bred in the eastern mountains, would arrive by boat. The first sign was the sound. A wet thud against the cottage's seaward wall, followed by another, then a scraping that set Sable's teeth on edge. Something was climbing the cliff face below her window. Dara heard it the same instant. Her body went rigid, her amber eyes flaring as the wolf beneath her skin surged toward the surface. Away from the walls, Dara commanded. Now! The seaward window exploded inward. A figure in black leather rolled through the shattered glass, landing in a crouch on the cottage floor. A second followed before Sable could draw breath. They wore no masks, and their faces were worse for it. Expressionless, clinical. The faces of people for whom killing was arithmetic. Dara shifted mid-stride. The transformation was seamless, her human form dissolving into a rust-furred wolf that launched itself at the nearest attacker with jaws aimed at the throat. They collided with a crash that splintered the table and sent herb jars shattering across the floor. The second hunter did not engage Dara. The second hunter looked directly at Sable's belly and drew a short blade coated in something that glistened black in the fading light. Night Veil. On a blade. The same compound that had stolen Kale's will, now weaponized to kill. Sable scrambled backward, her shoulder striking the stone mantel. The gutting knife was on the floor where she had dropped it. Too far. The hunter advanced with measured steps, blocking the only path to the door. The Solvanes send their regards, the hunter said. Not gloating, just stating a fact, the way one might announce the weather. Outside, the sound of Dara's warriors engaging more attackers erupted across the clifftop. Snarls, the ring of steel, a yelp of pain that cut short with terrible finality. Sable's hand found the iron poker by the hearth. She swung it with every ounce of strength her body could summon. The hunter caught it one-handed, wrenched it from her grip, and drove her backward into the wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Stars burst across her vision. The hunter's blade rose toward her throat. And something inside Sable broke open. Not broke apart. Broke open. Like a seed splitting its casing. like a door that had been locked since childhood finally giving way. The power had always been there. She had felt it every time she laid hands on a wound and watched the flesh knit shut. The healers who raised her had called it intuition. Sable had always known it was something more, something she had been taught to hide, something that in a woman of no bloodline would mark her as dangerous. But she was already being destroyed, and the lives inside her were seconds from ending. The light erupted from her hands. Not golden, like sunlight, silver, cold and fierce and ancient, the color of moonlight concentrated into something solid. It poured from her palms and struck the hunter square in the chest. The impact flung the assassin across the cottage and through the ruined seaward window. A scream, sharp and disbelieving, trailed behind the falling body before the cliff, and the sea swallowed it whole. Sable stood trembling, silver light still flickering between her fingers, staring at her own hands as though they belonged to a stranger. Across the room, Dara's wolf form had the other hunter pinned, jaws locked around the assassin's forearm. The wolf's amber eyes were wide, fixed on Sable with an expression that was unmistakably shock. More sounds from outside, steel, snarling, a human voice shouting orders in the clipped cadence of military command. Sable moved toward the door on legs that felt made of water. The clifftop had become a battlefield, Dara's two warriors fighting back to back against four dark-clad hunters, wolf forms slick with blood. But there were more coming. Shapes climbing the cliff path. Shapes from the inland ridge. Too many for three wolves to hold. One of Dara's warriors went down with a blade buried in its haunch. It howled in agony, and the sound struck something deep in Sable's chest, the same place where the silver light had been born. She stepped onto the clifftop. The wind caught her hair. The setting sun turned the sea behind her to molten copper, and the light in her hands blazed brighter, feeding on something she had never felt before. Not healing instinct, but protective fury. The rage of a mother whose children had been threatened. "Stop," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried harmonics that vibrated through bone and marrow and the primal core of every wolf present. The attackers froze. Even Dara's warriors paused, their hackles flattening in instinctive response to a frequency that predated language. The silver light expanded outward from Sable's body in a pulse. Where it touched the hunters, they staggered. Where it touched the wolves, their wounds began to close. A wave of dizziness crashed through her. The twins kicked violently, and Sable felt the power flickering, draining faster than she could sustain it. She had never used it like this, had never even known she could. And the cost was becoming apparent with every heartbeat. She dropped to one knee. The nearest hunter recovered first, a tall woman with braided silver hair. She advanced toward Sable with a fresh blade drawn. "Interesting trick," the woman said. "The Solvanes will want to know what you are, after we cut those pups from your belly." Sable's vision was graying at the edges. The light in her hands guttered like a candle in a gale. And then, the earth shook. Not figuratively. The ground beneath them physically trembled, a deep vibration that rose through the chalk cliffs and sent loose stones tumbling over the edge into the sea. The hunters stumbled. Even Dara's wolves pressed low against the grass. Something was coming up the cliff path. Something massive. The silver-haired hunter turned toward the sound, and for the first time, her composure fractured. A wolf the color of a thundercloud crested the ridge. It was enormous, taller than a draft horse at the shoulder, its fur a deep charcoal shot through with streaks of silver like lightning frozen in stone. Its eyes burned with a pale, terrible light that was not amber, not gold, but the white-hot intensity of a star about to collapse. It did not slow down. The wolf hit the silver-haired hunter at full speed, and the sound of the impact was something Sable would never forget. The hunter's body left the ground, traveled 15 feet through the air, and struck the cliff edge with a crack that echoed across the promontory. She did not get up. The remaining hunters broke. Not retreated, broke. They scattered like prey animals, abandoning formation, abandoning their wounded, running for the cliff path and the scrub grass and any direction that led away from the creature that had just annihilated their leader in a single stride. The great wolf let them run. Its burning gaze swept the clifftop once, confirming the threat was ended. Then those terrible, beautiful eyes found Sable. She was still on her knees. The silver light had died completely, leaving her drained and shaking, her hands pressed to her belly where the twins had gone utterly still. The wolf approached her. Each step was slow, deliberate, as though the creature that could shatter bone with a glance was terrified of frightening the woman kneeling before it. Its enormous head lowered as it drew close, and Sable could feel the heat radiating from its body, could hear the low sound building in its chest, not a growl, but something closer to a keen. A sound of longing so acute it bordered on pain. The wolf's nose touched her belly. Both twins kicked simultaneously. A sharp, synchronized jolt that made Sable gasp, and the wolf flinch backward as though struck. Then it pressed forward again, more gently, its muzzle resting against the curve of her stomach. The keening grew louder, and Sable realized with a shock that traveled through her entire body that the enormous wolf was trembling. Her hand moved without conscious thought. Her fingers sank into the coarse fur behind its ear, and the moment she touched it, the bond between them detonated. Not the dull ache of the months apart, not the burning torment of the mark. A flood, sensation, emotion, memory, crashing through her with the force of a dam breaking. His grief, his rage, his desperate clawing terror that he would arrive too late. And beneath it all, a love so vast and ferocious that it made everything else feel like a shadow cast by a bonfire. "Kyle," she whispered. The wolf shuddered beneath her hand. And then it was not a wolf at all. A man knelt before her in the blood-stained grass, his forehead pressed against her stomach, his massive frame racked with shudders that he could not control. His hands hovered at her sides, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin but not touching, as though he had lost the right to hold her and knew it. When he raised his head, the Alpha King of Arendor was weeping. Sable had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. In every version, she was composed, armored, cold. She would look at him with the indifference he had shown her at the ball and let him feel the weight of what he had done. She had never rehearsed the reality of Cale Draven on his knees before her, tears cutting clean tracks through the blood and dirt on his face, his body shaking as though something inside him was coming apart. "You are real," he said. His voice was a ruin, hoarse, splintered, the voice of a man who had been screaming into a void for longer than either of them could bear. "You are alive. I found you. His gaze dropped to her belly. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He stared at the swell of her stomach, as though he was witnessing something sacred and impossible, and his hovering hands curled into fists against his own thighs. "May I touch them?" he asked. The question split Sable open. The Alpha King. A man who could command armies with a word, who had bent 5 provinces to his will, who radiated power the way a furnace radiates heat, was kneeling in the grass asking permission to touch his own children. She took his fist, uncurled his fingers, and pressed his open palm against her stomach. The twins erupted, kicks from both sides, strong and urgent, as though the 2 small bodies inside her recognized the hand on the other side of the wall and were fighting to reach it. Cale made a sound, a choked, fractured noise that was neither laugh nor sob but something between both, and his other hand came up to cradle the curve of her belly as if it were made of glass. "Twins," he breathed. "Sable, why did you not tell me?" The tenderness evaporated. Sable pulled back, breaking the contact, and watched his face crumble as his hands fell to empty air. "Tell you?" The words came out serrated. "When should I have done that, Kyle? While you were choosing Revka Sylvan? while every wolf in Arendor howled their approval and I bled in the shadows? Kyle flinched as though each sentence was a blade. I did not choose her. I would never. I was there. Sable's voice rose, cracking. I heard you say her name. I watched your mouth form the words. I felt our bond tear apart inside my chest while you stood beside her like I had never existed. Sable, please. The night veil. Dara told you. I was poisoned. I had no control, no awareness, no. How am I supposed to believe that? The question erupted from a place 4 months deep, from the bottom of every sleepless night. Every morning she had pressed a cold cloth to the burning mark and told herself she meant nothing to him. How am I supposed to believe that the most powerful wolf in 5 provinces was turned into a puppet by a cup of wine? Because I am telling you. Kyle rose to his feet, and the air around him seemed to vibrate. Because I woke up 3 days later in a room that smelled like Revka's perfume, with no memory of how I got there. Because the first word I spoke was your name. Because I tore my own chambers apart with my bare hands when I found your room empty and your scent already fading. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Because my wolf has not let me sleep a full night since. Because he howls for you every time I close my eyes. Because I have spent every day since destroying everything I built, every alliance, every treaty, and every political advantage, burning it all to the ground to find you. And I would do it again. I would burn it 1,000 times. Sable's chin trembled. She would not cry. She would not let him see the walls she had built with such agonizing care begin to crumble. I thought you had thrown me away, she said, and her voice was small now, stripped of its armor. I thought everything you whispered to me in the grove was a lie, that I was a warm body for a king who needed distraction before settling down with a real mate. Kale closed the distance between them. His hands came up slowly, telegraphing every movement, giving her the chance to step away. When she didn't, his palms cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his size and power. You are the only real thing in my life, he said. The bond chose you before I knew your name. My wolf recognized your soul the first time you touched my wounds, and from that moment, there was never anyone else. There could never be anyone else. Not Revka, not any woman in any province in any kingdom. You. A sound escaped Sable's throat. Not a sob, something deeper. The sound of a wall collapsing. Months of grief and fury came flooding out, and she hated that his hands on her face could undo every defense she had constructed. I practiced telling you about the babies, she choked. The night of the ball. I stood in front of my mirror and practiced. I was going to say, you are going to be a father, and then I was going to watch your face and memorize whatever I saw there. Kale's expression shattered. Sable. Instead, I watched you choose her, and I ran. And I spent month after month alone in a cottage on a cliff telling your children about a father who did not want them. His thumb swept across her cheekbone, catching the tear she had failed to stop. I want them, he said, his voice raw as an exposed nerve. I want them with everything I am. I want you with everything I am. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that what happened on that platform was not me. His hand moved to the mark below her collarbone. The moment his fingers touched the scar, heat bloomed between them. Not pain this time, but warmth. Recognition. The bond stirring in its broken cradle, testing whether it was safe to reach for wholeness again. The Solvanes sent killers for me, Sable said. For our children. They called them whelps. The warmth in Kale's eyes turned to something molten and lethal. His wolf pressed against the surface, and for an instant his pupils contracted to vertical slits. Then the Solvanes have sealed their fate. Dara appeared at the edge of the clearing. Her human form was restored, though blood matted her auburn hair and one arm hung at an angle that spoke of recently healed fracture. Behind her, the two warriors, battered but alive, thanks to Sable's silver light, stood watch over the cliff top. "My king," Dara said. "The hunter you struck survived. She is talking." The Solvanes did not just send assassins for Sable. They sent a separate team to Arendor. Kale turned. "To do what?" "To take the keep. Lord Heron Solvane intends to declare your bond to Revka legitimate and your search for Sable evidence of madness. He plans to invoke the Sovereign's fracture, the ancient law that allows the Council to depose an Alpha King who has lost control of his wolf." The silence that followed was absolute. "He would not dare," Kale said quietly. "He has been building alliances for months. While you searched for Sable, Heron was buying loyalty. The Council has been told you are feral beyond recovery." Sable watched the information hit Kale like successive blows. His jaw hardened, his fists clenched. And beneath the fury, she could see something she recognized. The same helpless terror she had felt the night of the ball, when the world rearranged itself around her without asking permission. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at her fingers wrapped around his, and something in his expression shifted. The desperation softened. The fury found an anchor. "Together?" she asked quietly. Kyle raised her hand to his lips, not the mechanical gesture he had performed with Revka at the ball. This was deliberate, reverent. His mouth pressed to her knuckles, and she felt the bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. "Together," he said. "From this breath to my last." He turned to Dara. "How long before Heron moves on the keep?" "If the hunters were supposed to report back by dawn, and they have failed," Dara calculated, "he will assume Sable is dead and proceed. We have a day. Perhaps less." Kyle looked out over the shivering sea, where the last light was dying on the horizon. When he turned back, his eyes were no longer the storm gray that Sable knew. They were blazing white-silver, his wolf fully present behind the human mask. "Then we ride through the night. Every wolf I brought follows. We reach the keep before dawn." "And Sable?" Dara asked carefully. Kale looked at her. The question in his eyes was not whether she would come, it was whether she would let him carry her. "I am not staying on this cliff," Sable said firmly. "I did not survive assassins and 4 months of exile to sit by the sea while you fight my war without me." Something fierce and proud broke across Kale's face. He lifted her onto the horse that Dara's warriors had brought, a powerful gray destrier that matched the color of his wolf, and swung up behind her. His arm wrapped around her waist, his palm settling against her belly. The twins shifted beneath his touch, and she felt his breath catch against her hair. "My wolf needs you close," he murmured. 4 months without you nearly ended me. I cannot do this without you beside me." Sable leaned back against his chest. His heartbeat met her spine, strong and steady, and exactly as she remembered it from the nights in the grove when the world had been small enough to hold in 2 pairs of hands. "Then hold on to me," she said, "and do not let go." They rode through the night without stopping. Kale's wolves ran in formation around them, 37 strong. Their paws drummed the earth in a rhythm that matched the destrier's gallop, and in the moonlight, the pack moved like a single living shadow. Sable rode against Kale's chest and listened to him tell her everything. He told her about the 72 hours he had lost to the Night Veil, how the last thing he remembered before the darkness took him was raising a toast with the Elder Council, the wine tasting faintly of copper. How when he surfaced 3 days later, his wolf was screaming inside his skull with a fury that nearly split him in 2. He told her things Dara had not known. How Revka had whispered to him during those lost hours, planting false memories, fabricated images of Sable leaving willingly, of Sable refusing the bond, of Sable laughing at the idea of loving a king. How it was the mark, the searing, relentless burn of the claiming bite, that had cut through every planted lie and told him the truth. He told her about finding her chamber, the empty drawers, the bed she had made neatly before leaving, because even in heartbreak, Sable Marin folded her corners. the faint scent of frost mint oil that was the last trace of her in the keep. I did not speak for 2 days, he said against her hair. Dara thought I had gone catatonic. Then on the third day I caught a thread of the bond. Faint. Impossibly faint. And my wolf locked onto it like a compass finding north. I have been following that thread ever since. Sable's hand covered his where it rested on her belly. I felt you searching. In my dreams. Your voice calling my name. My wolf reached for you every time I slept. I did not know if you could hear him. I only knew that when I woke, the thread was still there, and that meant you were still alive somewhere. His arm tightened around her. Some mornings, that thread was the only reason I did not let the wolf take me completely. Dara said your control is failing. A pause. Yes. How bad? Another pause, longer this time. Bad enough that the council's fear is not entirely manufactured. Bad enough that I shifted during a trade negotiation and destroyed a table worth more than most villages earn in a year. Sable turned in the saddle to look at him. The moonlight carved his features in silver and shadow, and she could see the cost of their separation written in every line, the hollowed cheeks, the bruised crescents beneath his eyes. The tension in his jaw that spoke of a man holding himself together through will alone. The bond needs completion, she said quietly. It was not a question. Kale's gaze dropped to the mark below her collarbone. The bond needs you. It has always needed you. Completion is the seal, but you, your presence, your scent, your voice, you are the anchor. Without you, my wolf has nothing to hold on to. He spirals. I spiral. He lifted his hand to her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. When this is over, when you are safe and the Solvanes answer for what they have done, I will complete the bond the way it should have been completed. In the grove, under the full moon, with no politics and no poison. Only us. Sable leaned into his palm. The bond hummed between them, and for the first time since the ball, the mark on her chest did not burn. It sang. She kissed him. The contact was a spark dropped into dry kindling. His hand slid into her hair, and the kiss deepened with a desperation that tasted of salt and longing and months of absence compressed into a single point of contact. The bond roared through both of them, his emotion slamming into hers, hers flooding back into his, and for a blinding, breathless moment, they were one being, whole and unbroken. When they finally broke apart, Kale's eyes were blazing white-silver again. Soon, he promised, his voice rough. When this is finished. Dawn found them cresting the final ridge before the capital. The city of Arendor sprawled below them, its spires and battlements silhouetted against a sky the color of a bruise. Smoke rose from the eastern quarter. The main gates stood open, but the banners flying above the obsidian keep were wrong. The Alpha King's standard, a black wolf rampant on a field of storm gray, had been torn down. In its place flew the silver serpent of House Solvane, coiled around a crown that did not belong to them. Kale went still behind her. No, Dara breathed from her horse beside them. It is too soon. We were supposed to have until dawn. Heron did not wait for his hunters to report. Kale said, his voice stripped of everything except a cold that Sable had never heard from him before. He moved the moment I left the keep to find you. He knew I would leave. He counted on it. A scout materialized from the tree line, running full tilt, his face gray with exhaustion. My king. The Solvanes struck 6 hours after your departure. They had allies embedded in the household guard. Lord Heron has declared the sovereign's fracture, claims you have abandoned the throne. Revka has been installed as consort regent. Kale's arm was rigid around Sable's waist. She could feel his wolf pressing against the surface, the shift threatening to overtake him right there on the ridge. She placed her hand over his and squeezed. His breathing steadied. Barely. The hostages? Dara asked sharply. The scout swallowed. 41 members of the king's household who refused to swear loyalty to Heron have been imprisoned in the keep's lower halls. Servants, guards, the kitchen mistress, the old apothecary. Sable's blood went cold. Fennica, the woman who had raised her, who had taught her every herb and every healing technique she knew, who had hugged her on the morning of the ball and told her that whatever happened, she was proud of the woman Sable had become. They are to be executed at midday, the scout continued, as collaborators in the king's madness. Lord Heron is calling it a cleansing. The word hung in the morning air like ash. Cale looked down at Sable. She looked up at him. And between them, through the bond that pulsed with shared fury and shared grief, a decision was made without a single word being spoken. How many wolves does Heron command? Cale asked. Approximately 200 inside the keep, another 100 at the outer walls. But my king, many of them are conscripts, wolves who bent the knee because a blade was at their throat, not because they believe in the serpent banner. Cale turned to address the 37 wolves arrayed behind him. In the early light, their eyes gleamed with a fury that mirrored their king's. The Solvanes believe they have stolen a throne, he said. They believe their poison and their politics have succeeded. His voice hardened to iron. They are wrong. Today, we take back our home. He looked at Sable. And today, I introduce the true Queen of Arendor to her kingdom. The wolves howled as one. 37 voices raised in a battle cry that rolled down the ridge and across the valley toward the stolen city. And at the head of the pack, with his mate held close and his children stirring beneath his palm, the Alpha King rode toward war. The battle for the Obsidian Keep was not a siege, it was a reckoning. Cale's wolves hit the outer walls like a wave breaking against rotten timber. The Solvane conscripts, wolves who had bent the knee out of fear, saw their true king coming and made their choice in seconds. Some dropped their weapons, others shifted and joined his pack mid-charge. Within 2 hours, the inner gates had been smashed open by Cale's wolf form, which moved through the Solvane defenders like a storm given teeth. Sable watched from the ridgeline where Dara had positioned her, flanked by 4 wolves sworn to die before anything touched her. She could feel Cale through the bond, a furnace of controlled fury, each strike precise, each decision instantaneous. He was not raging, he was executing. There was a difference, and it terrified her more than rage would have. But as the sun climbed toward noon and the execution hour approached, a runner came scrambling up the ridge with blood on his face and panic in his eyes. "My lady, Lord Heron has sealed the great hall. He holds the hostages inside. He says if the king breaches the doors, he will begin killing them 1 per minute, starting with the old healer." Fennica. Sable was moving before the runner finished speaking, ignoring the protests of her guards. She knew these hallways. Every servant's passage, every shortcut the nobles never learned because they never looked at the people who clean their floors. She found Cale at the great hall doors, restrained by Dara and 2 of his largest wolves. He had shifted back to human form, but his eyes were white silver and his chest heaved with the effort of not shifting again. "You cannot go in," Dara was saying through gritted teeth. "He will start killing them the moment you—" "If I do nothing, they die anyway," Cale snarled. "Cale!" Sable's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He spun. The moment he saw her, his expression cycled through relief, terror, and fury in the space of a heartbeat. "Sable, I told you to stay on the ridge. If Heron wants leverage. He has 41 hostages. I am offering him one that is worth more than all of them combined." The blood drained from Cale's face. "No." "The king's bonded mate and his unborn heirs. That is the only currency Heron values more than those lives behind that door. I will not let you walk in there." Sable stepped close enough to press her palm against his chest. Beneath her hand, his heart hammered with the frantic desperation of a caged animal. "You told me on that horse that you could not do this without me beside you. she said quietly. This is what beside you looks like. Not safe on a ridge, not hidden in a cottage. Here, in the fire, where I choose to be. Kale's hand covered hers. The bond pulsed between them, fear and love tangled so tightly she could not tell whose emotions were whose. Trust me, she whispered. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the white silver had dimmed to storm gray. Human, present, agonized, but present. He released her. Sable pushed open the doors of the great hall and walked in alone. The hall that had hosted the mating ball mere months ago was unrecognizable. The iron chandeliers had been extinguished. The black marble platform was stained with something dark. 41 hostages knelt in rows before the dais, bound at the wrists, many of them bleeding from wounds inflicted for the crime of loyalty. And on the throne, Kale's throne, sat Lord Heron Sylvain, silver-haired and hawkish, wearing ceremonial armor that did not belong to him. The stolen crown of Arendor sat on his head at an angle that suggested haste. Beside him sat Revka. So, Heron said, leaning forward with an expression of genuine curiosity. The ghost who haunts our king finally materializes, and pregnant no less. How inconvenient. Sable ignored him. Her gaze swept the hostages until she found Fennica, kneeling in the second row, her white hair matted with blood, her healer's hands bound behind her back. The old woman's eyes widened when she saw Sable. "Child," Fennica breathed, "what have you done?" "What I had to." Sable turned to Heron. "Release the hostages. Take me instead." Heron's eyebrow arched. A servant girl offers herself in exchange for 41 lives. How theatrical. A servant girl carrying the Alpha King's twin heirs, the only legitimate claim to the throne that exists in this room, and we both know it is not sitting on your head. Heron's smile thinned. Beside him, Revka straightened, her pale eyes narrowing. "Kill her," Revka said flatly. "Kill her now, father, while the king is outside and cannot stop it." "Patience." Heron raised a hand. "The girl is right about one thing. A dead hostage has no value, but a living one, carrying the royal bloodline." He gestured to his guards. "Release the prisoners. Bind the healer girl." The hostages were cut loose. They stumbled toward the doors, some weeping, some too shocked to make a sound. Fennica tried to reach Sable, but a guard shoved the old woman forward with the rest. As rough hands seized Sable's wrists, she felt the bond with Kale spike with such violent desperation that her vision blurred. His panic, his rage, the wolf inside him throwing itself against his ribs, demanding to be unleashed. She sent back the only thing she could through the bond: calm, certainty, trust. And then something stirred beneath her hands. Not her power. The twins. They moved with a synchronicity she had never felt before, a coordinated surge, two small beings pushing outward with a single unified will. Silver light erupted from Sable's belly, but this was not the cold moonlight she had wielded on the cliff. Warmer, wilder, threaded with veins of deep amber. Their mother's silver and their father's amber, fused into something that had not existed in Arendor for 1,000 years. The light hit Heron's guards first, flinging them against the stone pillars. Heron himself was knocked from the throne, the stolen crown clattering across the marble floor. Pain ripped through Sable's body, not from the magic, from something deeper, something older. Her bones were shifting. "No," she gasped, dropping to her knees as the transformation tore through her. "Not now. Not here." But the twins had triggered what 4 months of suppression had only delayed. The claiming bite on her chest blazed white-hot as her body answered the call it had been resisting since the night Kale's teeth had changed her forever. She was becoming a wolf. The great hall doors detonated inward. Kale's wolf form, massive, thundercloud dark, eyes blazing, launched through the opening, a howl of pure anguish tearing from his throat as he saw Sable convulsing on the marble floor. Heron scrambled for the poisoned blade at his belt. Revka screamed. Sylvain guards poured from the alcoves, and Sable, caught between her human body and the wolf that was clawing its way out of her, could only curl around her belly and pray. The transformation devoured her. Every bone splintered and reformed. Her skin rippled as something beneath it fought to escape. The wolf that Kale's bite had planted inside her, gestating alongside her children through every month of exile, finally breaking free. Through the red haze of agony, she was aware of Kale fighting. A hurricane of fang and fury tearing through Sylvain guards. Of Heron advancing with a short sword coated in night veil. And of Revka, standing at the edge of the dais, watching with an expression that was not fear, but calculation. Heron reached Sable first. "Your pups will never draw breath," he said, raising the night veil blade above her convulsing body. "And your king will watch you die knowing he failed you twice." The blade fell. Sable's hand shot up and caught it. Not her human hand. Fingers elongated, tipped with claws, wrapped in fur the color of winter starlight. The night veil coating sizzled against her shifting skin, and the pain was immense, but she held. She held because letting go meant her children would die. She held because months of running and surviving had forged something in her that was harder than any poison. The transformation completed in a detonation of silver-amber light. The wolf that stood where Sable had knelt was not large, not compared to Kale's massive form. She was lean, built for speed rather than brute force, her fur a luminous silver white that seemed to glow from within. But her eyes burned with twin fires, silver and amber intertwined, and the power that radiated from her made even Kale's wolves flatten their ears in instinctive awe. She was not just a wolf. She was the first true bond wolf born in Arendor in 1,000 years. Sable lunged. Her jaws found Heron's sword arm with surgical precision. The Lord screamed, a high, undignified sound, as bones gave way like dry branches. The night veil blade clattered to the marble. She released him, and he crumpled, clutching the ruin of his arm, his grand ambitions bleeding out onto the floor of the hall he had stolen. Kale reached her side. His dark fur pressed against her silver white, and through the bond, blazing now, wide open, every barrier between them dissolved. She felt his awe, his pride, his overwhelming, staggering relief. "You shifted." His voice in her mind was shaking. "Someone had to save us both," she replied. "You were taking too long." A sound escaped him that was unmistakably a laugh, rough, broken, disbelieving. My impossible, magnificent mate. Movement at the edge of her vision. Revka had not run. While her father bled on the floor, Revka Sylvain had retrieved a crossbow from a fallen guard and was raising it with steady hands. "You were nothing," Revka hissed. "A servant who scrubbed floors and mixed potions. You had no right to him. No right to any of this." Sable shifted back to human form with surprising ease. She stood before her enemy, one hand on her belly, and met Revka's gaze without flinching. "I never wanted the throne," Sable said. "I wanted him. And he wanted me. The bond chose us. Your family tried to unmake it. All you proved is that it cannot be unmade." Revka's finger tightened on the trigger. Kale's jaws closed around the crossbow and crushed it to splinters. He shifted to human, one arm locking Revka's wrists behind her back, while his wolves surged through the hall, pinning the remaining Sylvain guards to the floor. "Revka Sylvain," Kyle said, his voice filling the great hall with the weight of a king reclaiming himself. "You and your house are charged with treason, attempted murder of the true queen, and conspiracy against the crown." "You chose me," Revka spat, "before the entire kingdom. You spoke my name. The law?" A puppet mouthing words it was forced to say does not constitute a choice. The mating ball is void. It was always void. Kyle released her to the waiting guards. Take her to the cells. She will face judgment before the assembled packs. He turned to Sable. The great hall was littered with the wreckage of battle. Broken weapons, shattered marble, the stolen crown lying forgotten on the floor. But Kale walked past all of it and stopped before the woman who had been his servant, his secret, his deepest wound, and the only home his wolf had ever known. Are you hurt? He asked, his hands moving over her arms, her shoulders, and her belly. I am more than well. And she was. Her body thrummed with a vitality she had never known. The wolf and the healer and the mother fused into something complete. The twins. I think the shift helped them. I can feel them differently now. Stronger. Kale's palm flattened against her stomach. The twins pressed back, one against each side of his hand, synchronized, deliberate. He made a choked sound and pulled her against his chest. I watched Heron raise that sword over you, he whispered into her hair, and for one moment I believed I had lost everything, that 4 months of searching had brought me here only to watch you die. I caught the blade. You caught the blade. A tremor moved through him. You caught a night veil blade mid-shift while carrying my children. I do not deserve you. Sable pulled back to look at him. You crossed 5 provinces to find me. You burned your kingdom's alliances to the ground. You fought your own wolf every day for 4 months to stay human long enough to reach me. She placed her hand on his chest over his heart. You deserve this. We both do. His gaze dropped to the mark below her collarbone. The bond. It needs completion. I have waited. We have both waited. Long enough. The great hall had gone quiet. Kale's wolves lined the walls. The freed hostages stood in clusters near the doors. Fennica, her wrists still raw from the bindings, watched from the front of the crowd with tears streaming freely down her weathered face. Every eye was on them. Here? Sable asked softly. Now? In front of everyone? I hid you once, Kale said. I kept you in shadows and servant corridors and secret midnight meetings. I will never hide you again. Let them see. Let every wolf in Arendor know what was done to us and what we survived. He tilted his head, bared the side of his throat, the most vulnerable point on a wolf's body. The gesture of an alpha offering himself to his mate not as a king to a subject, but as an equal to an equal. Claim me, Sable. Complete what the grove began. Make me yours in front of the world that tried to keep us apart. Her wolf rose inside her, not with violence, but with a tenderness that ached. It guided her forward, her lips finding the juncture of his neck and shoulder, where his pulse beat strongest. She could feel his heartbeat against her mouth, rapid and fierce and alive. She bit down. The bond exploded. Not a metaphor, not a feeling, an event. A detonation of shared consciousness that ripped through both of them and left nothing hidden. Every wall, every secret, every locked chamber of the heart blown open. She saw herself through his eyes, not the servant who scrubbed floors, not the orphan with no bloodline. Through Kale's eyes, she was the healer who touched broken things and made them whole, the mother of his children, the center of his existence, the reason his wolf had fought to stay sane. And he saw himself through hers. Not the puppet who had spoken another woman's name. Through Sable's eyes, he was the man who had crossed 5 provinces on a thread of bond light, who had destroyed his political power rather than accept a false mate, who had earned her love not through crowns, but through the devastating act of never stopping his search. When she released him, they were both trembling so violently that they had to hold each other to stay standing. My queen, Kale breathed. My king, Sable answered. The great hall erupted, not with the hollow political cheers that had accompanied the false choosing at the ball. This was different. Raw, emotional, the sound of wolves who could feel the completed bond radiating through the room like warmth from a hearth fire. Howls rose from every throat. Fennica was openly sobbing. Dara, leaning against a pillar with her arms crossed and blood still drying in her hair, was smiling for the first time since the nightmare began. In the weeks that followed, Arendor healed. Lord Heron Solvane was tried before the assembled packs. The evidence, Night Vale, planted suggestions, assassins, staged consummation the coup, was laid bare for every wolf to witness. He was executed at dawn on the first day of summer. Revka was stripped of her name, her wolf, and her bloodline, exiled to the barren salt flats beyond the eastern mountains. The sentence was considered lenient. Sable had argued for it. Kale had wanted worse. The conscript wolves who had served Heron under duress were pardoned. The 41 hostages were honored. Fennica was given chambers in the keep's upper floors and the title of royal healer, a position she accepted with a sharp look at Kale and the words, "If you ever make that girl cry again, king or not, I will put something in your wine that makes Night Vale look like chamomile tea." Kale had not argued. The bond between the Alpha King and his true mate radiated stability through the realm. The wolves who had grown erratic settled. Pack lords who had sided with Heron came forward to swear fresh loyalty. And on a warm evening in late summer, with the windows of the royal chambers thrown open to a breeze that carried the scent of wild flowers from the warden's grove, Sable brought 2 children into the world. A boy, born first, with storm-gray eyes and his mother's silver-white hair. When Fennica placed him on Sable's chest, his tiny hand closed around her finger with a grip that was already impossibly strong, and a faint shimmer of healing light flickered across his skin. A girl, born second, fierce and howling, with dark hair like her father's, and eyes that shifted between silver and amber as though they could not decide which parent to favor. When Kale lifted her, his massive hands cradling her as though she were made of spun glass, she stopped crying immediately, pressed her face into his neck, and growled. "She has your temperament," Sable said from the bed, exhausted and radiant. "She has your stubbornness," Kale replied, his voice wrecked, tears falling without shame onto his daughter's dark hair. He sat beside Sable on the bed, their son in her arms, their daughter in his, and pressed his forehead to hers. "You saved us," he whispered. "Not just tonight, not just on the cliff or in the great hall. You saved me the moment you touched my wounds in the apothecary and looked at me like I was just a man, not a king, not an alpha, a man. No one had ever done that before." Sable's fingers traced the claiming mark on his throat, healed now into a silver scar that caught the light. Her matching mark below her collarbone had transformed from the bruised violet of separation to a luminous silver that seemed to pulse with its own quiet warmth. "I never stopped loving you," she said, "even when I believed the worst. Even when I was alone on that cliff convincing myself you had thrown us away. The bond knew. The mark knew. Some part of me always knew." Kyle kissed her, softly with their children warm between them, and the bond hummed through them both like a chord struck on an instrument too beautiful for human hands. "In this life," he said against her lips, "and in every life that follows, you are my heart, Sable, my mate, my home." Outside the window, the wolves of Arendor lifted their voices to the summer sky, and in the archives of the Obsidian Keep, a new chapter was inscribed. The story of a healer with no name who became a queen, of an alpha king who dismantled his kingdom to find the mate stolen from him by poison and treachery, of a bond that endured exile, assassination, and war, not for territory or power, but for the unbreakable truth that some souls are made for each other. They had been torn apart by the cruelest hands fate could devise, and they had found their way home. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.